waiting to be regathered. So whether we read in Zechariah, and Zechariah talks about Zechariah chapter 8, talks about, it says, chapter 8, verse 6 through 9. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, if it be marvelous in the eyes of the remnant of the people in these days, should it also be marvelous in thine eyes, saith the Lord of hosts. Thus the Lord, behold, I will save my people from the east country and from the west country. I will bring them, and they shall dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, and shall be my people. And I will be their God in truth and righteousness. Thus saith the Lord, let your hands be strong, that ye that hear in these days the words by the mouth of the prophets which were in the day that the foundation of the house of the Lord of the host was laid, that the temple might be built. Okay? All right. Israel, Zechariah 9. Rejoice, O greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just, having salvation, lowly, riding upon an ass, upon a colt, the foal of an ass. And I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the horse from Jerusalem. All right. This is the Messiah. This is the advent of the Messiah. This is Zion's deliverance. Verse 11. I have sent forth prisoners out of the pit. Okay, this is kind of what was being said in Isaiah 49, to release the captives, to cause the desolate heritages to be fulfilled. Go read about it. I don't know what G-Con's talking about. A partial regathering. And you notice that he never got to his point. He never got to his point. He chose to fool around. When I had bent Judah for me, filled the bow of Ephraim, and raised up thy sons, O Zion, against thy sons, O Greece. Okay? They're gonna take the heathen. This is in Zephaniah chapter 3. The remnant will take the heathen. You know what I'm saying? Like, listen to what the prophets are telling you. G-Con will freestyle the whole way. He's making all these claims. Where are his scriptures? Like, I'm begging him to get to the point. Zechariah 10:8. I will hiss for them and gather them, for I have redeemed them, and they shall increase as they have increased. I will sow them among the people, and they shall remember me in far countries, and they shall live with their children and turn again. I will bring them again also out of the land of Egypt, and gather them out of Assyria. I will bring them into the land. I will strengthen them in the Lord. They shall walk up and down in his name. I mean, why did he have such a problem about me going to Micah 2? Micah 2, Zechariah obviously doesn't say the same exact thing as Zechariah 2. But it's talking about the same thing. Why couldn't G-Con see that? He was playing his little Christian apologist rhetoric game, because his job is to get more subscribers. His job is to get more subscribers. You know what I mean? I don't care how many subscribers I got. Look at my channel. I got 6 subscribers. I got six subscribers on my channel, and we got 7
Why couldn't G-Con see?
Big deal. Because one day I'm gonna die, and nobody's gonna remember my name at all. I hope you're listening, G-Con. There's one day nobody's gonna listen to your. There's gonna be a day where nobody listens to your YouTube channel. Nobody's gonna care who you are. It's gonna be a stalled account. If the internet's still working, right? Like if the U.S. I don't know. I hate to conjecture. I'm sure the internet will keep going, but there's gonna come a point where, nobody's gonna frequent your 100 years from now, 50 years from now, who's gonna be listening to G-Con? Nobody cares how many subscribers you have. It's about nourishing the flock. It's about making sense out of what we have on these pages. Right? Like he said there was a partial gathering. What the hell are you talking about? What the hell are you talking about, G-Con? You wouldn't let me ask you. I couldn't ask you without you saying brother, 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 and shutting me down. What are you talking about? Where are your flock? It's about making sense out of what we have on these pages. You hit the blunt? Did you hit the blunt before you got on here? Did you hit the blunt? Did you hit the blunt that one night when we were talking about Zechariah and I said who is the king priest and you went into chematology? You went into Egyptian chematology to make the connection?
His brother said,
go watch that. About 40 minutes in I show up. And about maybe 20, 30 minutes after.
His brother is ignorant.
The dude must have had
he must have did some
shrooms or something. He must have poured some NyQuil in his in his soda. I just let that dude talk. I didn't even want to get in his way. I'm like, I'm let him. He didn't even know what's happening to him right now.
This is an ignorant brother right here.
He doesn't even know what's happening to him. I let him talk his madness.
His brother is ignorant.
I've seen the link. We've seen the links that if you go and watch the video, you can see it too. Yeah, go watch it, Welch. It's down my timeline. Just I'll reshare it. I'll tag you in it.
Hold on, yeah, I'm trying to.
Very psychedelic Christian apologetics.
His brother ignorant right here.
I disagree, Shannon. I disagree. We believe that Israel is a nation, and we believe that there will be a physical regathering according to the promise that was prophesied in the books of Moses, Deuteronomy 30, 1-10. It's there. And Micah 7, sorry, G-Con, you're going to have to give me a second. Mike, at the end he says, who is a God like unto thee, that pardoneth iniquity and passeth by the transgression of the remnant of his heritage? Did you hear that? Who is a God like unto thee, that pardoneth iniquity and passeth by the transgression of the remnant of his heritage? He's going to forgive Israel. He retaineth not his anger forever, because he delighted in mercy.
All right, so
verse 19, he will turn again. He will have compassion upon us. He will subdue our iniquities, and thou will cast all their sins into the depths of the sea. Listen, Sean.
Hey, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the join link. The join link will be in the description, and then let me go to the Facebook page. We're gonna get into the Facebook page. Let's see. Let's come up out of here. Go to the channel.
Depths of the sea.
What up with it, Nashawn? What up, DC? What up, Pastor Sean? What up? Who was that saying? I don't know how to say that name, but the Islamic or the Arabic writing. I'm sorry. He's not in the Zoom. He's what up, Tony Teb? How you doing, brother? He's on YouTube. So let me address some of this brother's some of the stuff that he's talking about. That way, I can put some of this stuff to shine. Let's see, how do I share this? Okay, hit the share button. Copy. All right. So can we go back to YouTube? Get to Facebook. Hey, make sure you guys share this if you guys can. If you guys can share it, that'd be great. We're gonna talk about a little end-time prophecy. I'm waiting for that brother to come in, or if anybody would like to come in, it doesn't matter, you know what I'm saying? I'll put the YouTube link in there. And let's see. So I got the YouTube up in there, up in there. And, that's, all right, so we got that. All right, so let me check the chat room and see if anybody, so we ain't got no participants. If you want to come and join, you definitely can get in on this conversation. So let me go back to, but what I want to do is I want to share this link to a couple of YouTube pages. Facebook pages. And then we're gonna get started. And I'm gonna see if this brother gonna hop on and hop over so we can explain some of the stuff. Let's see. I'm just sharing some of these group shots. Bear with me. Bear with me. Let's see. All right, let's get this thing. Discussion. All right, so we're gonna see if we can get this brother over here. I put the link out. He wasted time playing games. You know what I'm saying? I also put the link in the chat room. So if you want to join the panel, you can definitely do so. You know what I'm saying? I got no problem with that. No problem with that at all. So still don't see nobody joining in. Like I said, if you brothers want to join in, you can definitely do so. All right, well, fair. Appreciate it. And if you guys want to get in on the conversation, as I stated before, in the description box is where the join link is at. So you can get in. So, all right. So one of the things I want to talk about, matter of fact, let me make sure I hit this other brother up on Facebook because he always want to come in and I don't ever put it in like I should. So let's see. Let's send a message here. Then let me send him the link to join. Invite. Copy URL back here. All right, so I sent him that, so we should be good. All right, so we're good on that end. All right, cool. Okay. All right, so what one of the things that I wanted to, you said it doesn't work in the description. Let me get that. Let me put that in there again. I'm gonna put it in the chat room this time. See if this link works right there. All right, so the join link, I updated it in the chat room, so we should be good on that note. So let's get back out of here. And go here. And if you guys can see my screen, I wanted to kind of go to that Zechariah 14 to make my point before I move on to where I'm gonna go to. And one of the things we was addressing was a book that he had, and I'd like for him to be on here so he can, really bring out that book. What I want to go to is the Zechariah 14. I'm gonna open up also some I'm sorry, let me get up out of this. Close this up right here. Right to KJV library. Let's go up. Let's open up some notes. It wouldn't be side by side. Got some notes here. Stakes, study notes. And then let's see. And we got somebody in here. When you come in, always make sure you hit the you can raise your hand up and hit the raise your hand up so I can know you in here. All right. What up, Steven?
Yo, what's up, man?
Oh, chilling. How you been doing?
So what's this guy's claim? I showed up a little late.
Okay, now I was showing a partial fulfillment in Zechariah 14 of Israel partially being in the land before the full gathering. So his claim is that there is a partial gathering before a full gathering. I went to Zechariah 14 to, which I was getting to, which I never got to over on his channel. And he went to Micah, and he also went to Matthew and the other plethora of scriptures, but he never went to Zechariah 14. So that's basically his claim, is that there is no partial gathering before a full gathering, because like 1948 is not that's not a prophecy, you know what I'm saying? And so I would say, well, if that's not a prophecy, then we would have to say that somehow or some way that Israel will part of Israel will be back in the land before they come back. And so that's my argument, and arguing against that.
So is he saying like it's already been fulfilled, or that is yet to be fulfilled?
He said that it's not happening until Christ come back, and so he was saying that all of Israel will be gathered at the time of Christ, and so he doesn't see that there's a partial gathering before Christ come back. And that's his position. I don't know your position because I never heard you on when you talk about eschatology, so I don't know your position on that either.
I take a partial preterist position.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So you 70 AD a little bit, but you're not full preterism.
Nah, I can't entirely go full preterist. I mean, there's some things I may agree with it, but others, no, that's way out there.
Yeah. So I don't know what you think about the text of Zechariah 14:1, right? And we do got a full preterist that's in the room, which is Tony Tebb, which is my brother. I love the brother, you know what I'm saying? But he's a full preterist, you know what I'm saying? Which, it is what it is. But my position is when you look at Zechariah 14 dealing with eschatology, I believe 20 Matthew 24 and also Luke addresses 21 addresses three things. And it says that actually in Matthew. It says in Matthew chapter 24 at the beginning, it says, see, he says, this is Matthew chapter 24:2. He says, and Jesus said unto them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto thee, or unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. So they asked him a question in verse 3. It says, and as he sat upon the Mount of the Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us, when shall these things be? Question. And what shall be the sign of thy coming? Question. And the end of the end of the world. So there's three things that's being asked here. When shall these things be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world? And so he's going to address some of those things that we see in Matthew. And also when we start dealing with Luke addresses some of those things in 70 AD as pertaining to there should not be one stone left upon another. So he addresses some of these things within Matthew 24, and then in Luke you can kind of see some things that would transpire immediately after the tribulation, and also during the dispersion of Israel and the Gentiles taking over the land of Israel during those times. But you can see also in Matthew 24 the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, which was not a 70 AD event, I'm saying, which points to a latter time that we see. And some people full preterists, and I don't know, sometimes even partial preterists will argue that Matthew 24 and 15 is in regards to 70 AD. But reason why I want to go back to Zechariah 14 is because now I'm gonna read this and I want to know your take on this. What do you think about this? And like I said, if anybody want to get in, they can press they can go to the description and the link is in the description, so they can definitely come on in and join the conversation. Make sure y'all share this because I'm just getting back on, so a lot of people probably don't, they ain't getting indications that I'm on because it takes me a while to get back on, do YouTube videos. I don't do them all the time. So when you look at Zechariah 14:1, it says, "Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil should be divided in the midst of thee." So one will ask is, where's this spoil being divided at in the midst of them? He says right here, verse 2, "For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle." So he's saying the spoil, when the day of the Lord cometh, will be divided in the midst of them, right? "For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem." So we know there's going to be a battle at Jerusalem, and the nations will come against Jerusalem. And it says, look, the city should be taken, not all of Israel, but basically the city. It says be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city should go forth into captivity. So the people that's in the city are going to go forth into captivity by the nations that surround them. Let me stop this real. Does my background loud?
No, you're kind of choppy in and out here and there, but
I'm chopping here and there out. Let me make sure. Let me listen to this real quick and make sure that I'm at least coming through a little bit.
you got headphones nearby?
Yeah, I got headphones. We got some headphones. Hold on.
No, you're kind of choppy in and out here and there, but
I'm chopping here and there out. Let me make sure. Let me listen to this real quick and make sure that I'm at least coming through a little bit. Yeah, let me grab my headphones. Let me go here real quick. Let me know if you can hear me.
yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you heard.
You said you can.
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, cool. All right, so let's see. Let me see how this sound on this thing right here. Yeah, so we got good sound. So the sound is cool. All right, so when you look at, so it says, "For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city." So we see that the houses will be rifled, and people will go into captivity in the city. But it's the people of Israel, because he's gathered all the nations against Jerusalem. Look what it says, verse 3. "Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle." So the Lord is going to go forth and fight against these nations, right? As when he fought in the day of battle. But look what it says, verse 4. "And his feet shall stand in the day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west. And there shall be a very great valley, and half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south. And ye shall flee the valley of the mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach unto Azal. Yea, ye shall flee, like as ye fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, the king of Judah. And the Lord my God," look what he says, "the Lord my God shall come, and all the saints with thee." Now, what's ironic here is that we see that these people are fleeing from where? Out of Jerusalem, right? And so if they're fleeing out of Jerusalem before the Lord come, then it has to be safe to say that these people are in Jerusalem.
So then one would ask, well, when did they get back to the land of Jerusalem? When did this happen? You know what I'm saying? When did this take place? And so when you look at it, it says, and the Lord my God shall come and all the saints with thee, and shall come to, and it shall come to pass that in that day the light there shall, in that day that the light shall not be clear nor dark, right? But what I wanted to read is this is when you look at verse 9, it says the Lord shall be king over all the earth, and that day should there be one Lord and his name one, right? Now, when we begin to look at when he's coming back, he's going to help Israel when he's coming back. But can we actually see this in other scriptures? We definitely can. If you look to my right here, I have my Dake study notes here, right? Now in my
Mhm.
Dake study notes, um, if you go to a plethora of scriptures here, you have also where is it? You have Zechariah 14, and let's say for example 3. Now, if you go to Zechariah 14 and 3, and you click on some of these scriptures here, you just hover over them. I don't know if you guys can see this. Hold on. It was weird and click like it should. It says, and ye who are troubled rest with us. This is 2 Thessalonians 1 and 7. And ye who are troubled rest with us when the Lord shall be revealed from heaven with his mighty angels, right? Now, what I want to do is I want to go back to that text that I went to earlier. And let's see. Let's go back to uh Zechariah 14. And when you begin to look at the other references that it has here, then you also see that in Jude, it says also, and Enoch also the seventh from Adam prophesied of thee, saying, behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints. So clearly here's the Lord, he's coming back, right? He has 10,000 of his saints. And then we also just read a scripture where it says that he's coming back too. And there's a plethora more scriptures, even in Revelations, that says this very same thing about him coming with the saints, right? And also with the angels and with his heavenly army. Now, when we get back to Zechariah, we see in Zechariah that there is people there before he does a full gathering. We know in Isaiah 11 it talks about he will gather Ephraim and also Judah. And we understand that we know that, you know, that he will do that, and we know that he partially has done that, but the fullness of this comes in when he gathers all these guys, you know, in one and bring them back to the land during his time and disperse I mean and part out their land to Israel and those strangers that dwell among Israel, which have inheritance in the promised land just as well. It says, then should the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. That one will have to ask, according to the scriptures we just read, when does this take place? And you will have to say this takes place before he comes back. And then we see that he comes back to help Israel, which I haven't got off into the other scriptures, but I want to know what do you think about that? What do you see within that text, Stephen?
Well, you already started off with the first part of 14, namely, on that day, many nations are going to come against Israel, and talks about plunder, and they will be ravaged, raped, and also also goes on that God's going to fight for them. The rest of the latter parts, it's describing basically all nations acknowledging God as king, and that the rites and rituals of the temple system are going to be pretty much enforced. Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, like what you described, that is what I once believed in my dispensational period Um, uh, I don't know entirely, but I guess I sort of more or less lean towards an already fulfilled position, but I'm not entirely sure. But I mean, I'm not saying like there isn't a specific role for, say, modern Israel and God's plan. There is what, because not all Jews actually believe in Jesus, although there are Jews in Israel that are coming to faith in Christ. So I guess you could read it that way, though I lean more towards a partial preterist position.
Right. And reason why I take that position is because I know I'm a dispensationalist already, but I take that position because when you read Romans, it says that blindness in part has happened to Israel. And so one of the other scriptures that I want to bring out when it says in this is Revelations 19 and 11, it says, and I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he doth judge and make war. It says, and it tells you his eyes and how he was clothed. When you read verse 14, look what it says. And the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, right? So we see it says, and out of his mouth go forth the sharp sword, that with it he shall smite the nations. Now, when you go back to Zechariah, what's interesting about this text is that in Zechariah 14, right? Look what it says. It says, verse what is it? Verse 7. Well, not verse 7.
Verse 6.
Yeah, see, it's verse 6. Yeah, there it is, verse 6. No, not verse 6. I just read it earlier. Verse 4. Now, it says, and his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem, right? Now, when you look at it, verse 3, it also says, then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations. So we know that the Lord is coming forth to fight, right? According to what we read in Revelations and other scriptures. Now, verse 5 is the key here, because when you look at the latter half of 5, it says, ye shall flee like as ye fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah the king, or Uzziah the king of Judah. And the Lord my God shall come, and look what it says, and all the saints with thee. Now we just read a plethora of other scriptures where the Lord is going to come with the saints with him. We read in Jude, you read in Matthew, you read in Revelations, and other scriptures. Now, the thing about this text is that when you read Romans, watch what Romans says. Remember it says about Mount Zion, and the Lord shall come, and his feet shall stand on Mount Olives, and all of that type of stuff. Look what it says here. This is Romans chapter 9. Oh, I'm sorry, Romans chapter 10. Let's go back. Romans 10. Well, let's go back to 11. And let's jump down a little bit. Romans 10 and let's go down to verse 24. No, not 24. Where's that? Verse 26. It says, well, we can jump back up to 25. For I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part is happened to Israel, and to the fullness of the Gentiles become in. And that means the rule and reign of the Gentiles concerning the beast that was talked about the image in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7, Daniel 9, Revelation 17, and also Revelation 13 concerning the beast that we're going to see which is the dealing with the Gentiles, the reign of the Gentiles, that ruled over Israel. And so it talks about though the great mountain or stone that was cut, which was Christ, without hands, that fell and shattered the image at the feet, and to the rest of the image fell down. Then also when we talk about uh the beast concerning Daniel chapter 7. Now, when you look at this, it says, and so all of Israel shall be saved, as it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. So we see that in Zechariah 17, Zechariah 14, is that the nations are actually gathered against Israel. And the only reason why we see the nations gathered against Israel in the Old Testament is when Israel was in cahoots with the nations, and the nations turned on Israel, and God allowed the nations to turn on them to teach them a lesson. And so the only way Israel will come to trust in the Messiah and believe on the Messiah again is when the Messiah appear the second time to redeem Israel from the troubles that they're in. And that is actually according to Isaiah chapter 11. Also, when you start talking about Isaiah chapter 9, these different scriptures talking about the Messiah who will redeem Israel, and also in Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 2, the stone that the builders rejected, that's Christ. The same stone that shattered the feet of the image became a mountain. So he comes back to deliver the blind Israel. And the nations have gathered against Israel because Israel was in cahoots with the nations. Now the nations is going to gather against them. This is what's happening to what you see today. Israel is in cahoots with the nations, partial Israel, the governors, all the people of the state of Israel, and they lean into them for their help. Well, what's going to happen when those nations turn on them? According to the scriptures, they gonna have to trust in the Messiah to come and save them, as they always did during the Judges, during the first dispersion, before they was dispersed, and they was leaning to their own understanding, lying with false prophets and different things, and during the Babylonian dispersion just as well. So when you look at this text, there's somebody that's in this land prior to Israel, prior to Christ coming into the land. And that's what I see concerning this text when it comes to on a spiritual physical taking over, and also a spiritual awakening, you know what I'm saying? Well, I don't want to say it in that way because people think this is some type of occultic type of stuff, but I don't know if you want to say something, Stephen, but you can go ahead.
Well, I don't know. It's like the observing the Feast of Booths and all coming to the temple of God in Jerusalem. I mean, how does that fit within the new covenant though? Because like in Hebrews it says the old covenant's it's fading away. It's replaced with a new one. So how does this really fit into that? Because I kind of see that a little bit problematic in that instance.
Right, and I see that somewhat. But if you look at what we're going to have within the 1,000-year reign period, I don't know, you don't deal with the millennium period or 1,000-year.
I guess I would lean towards, I guess I'd say I'd lean possibly either probably post-millennial period. Like I believe when Christ returns, he's going to rule and reign, and that'll be it.
Will he rule and reign for 1,000? I mean, well, will the devil be locked up for 1,000 years until he's?
Well, I take Revelation a little differently. Like again, partial prayer, so I believe most of it's already fulfilled, but not all of it. So yeah, I guess I lean towards that a little bit.
Yeah, so if you know, I've seen people try to say that there is no 1,000 years, but there is no 1,000 years. But when you look at it, if the Satan and the false prophets and it's if they're taken off the earth and they're giving it to the lake of fire, and it says that the Satan was thrown and cast down in chains for 1,000 years. So then in the 1,000 years, it says that he was loose for a season, right? And this is after the 1,000 years. He was. I mean, this is. I'm sorry. Yeah, after the 1,000 years, he's loose for a season. So the 1,000 years, if they say, well, you know, we know that Satan is after this 1,000 years that he's going to be loosed for this season. He's going to come up against this city. You know what I'm saying? That we see. Now, when you look at Ezekiel, because most people deal with Ezekiel or either Zechariah in regards to the Feast of Tabernacles. So there's three type of people that we're going to see, and within this within Earth, the realm of Earth, or they come from the realm of Earth. First of all, you're going to see natural, what you call natural Gentiles, and these are natural Gentiles that are a remnant of Gentiles, because in Revelations it says that a lot of men will be destroyed during these tribulation, during the trial and testing on the earth. So during that time, you have what you call natural Gentiles. Now these Gentiles don't necessarily believe, but they will believe because of the different things that will be happening, and plus the different evangelism that we will be taking place during this time, because people will be being evangelized to during these times of what we see in the what was shown to John within the tribulation. Now, the second people we're going to have is natural Israel. And so remember, the natural Gentiles consist of all the nations of the ones that have not been cut off, whose name has been preserved. Um, I'm pretty sure everybody know when it says all of Israel shall be saved, you don't think that it's talking about um, all of Israel, or every Israelite individual. No, this is a group preservation, or a group that is reserved. The names of these nations and the names of Israel that will be reserved. Now, this is very important, because when you start dealing with like the cultural context of it, and especially what it means to have your family name reserved, is very important. So the 1,000 year reign, the purpose of that is to replenish the earth back again with natural people during this 1,000 year reign. Because remember, the scripture says clearly that in the book of Revelations that a lot of people is going to die. A whole bunch of people is going to die. And so one of the ways to replenish or repopulate the earth is through this 1,000 year reign. So it's going to be natural people. Now, we got two people here that we see. Now, then you're gonna have what you call spiritual people, people who we see that Paul talked about, um, whose bodies may be glorified bodies. Some of those people may have passed already, whose bodies will be resurrected, you know, or some of those people bodies may be changed. They will have glorified bodies. As Christ has that body, they will have glorified bodies. Some people will not see death in that sense, that their body may be changed. I know there's argument about that, and you know this that, but this is what I see in the scriptures, what it's talking about. Now, then you have also spiritual Israelites. Now, what I mean by spiritual Israelites is altogether, this is what the church is. So we can say these are a category of three people. The church is composed of Israelites and also Gentiles, not which are non-Israelites. That's what the church is composed of. And so we're going to have these groups of people who have these glorified bodies that will rule and reign over the nations. It says, know ye not that the saints shall judge the world? So when will the saints judge the world? During that 1,000 year reign. And so me personally, I believe, and I suggest that you guys go study some of Michael Heiser's work, that those that are in Christ during that time will rule over the natural people over the world and judge over them, and take the position of the Elohims that fell, that was in the council. And that's my position on that. Now, that's how I list that when it comes to what we see concerning the 1,000-year reign to replenish. And so when you start talking about the natural things that we see, which look back to the work of Christ, these nations, there still will be death according to the scriptures within this time, because the scriptures actually said that a child will grow to be 100 years old and grow past 100 years old. But we also see that if a nation come not up in the feast of the tabernacle to keep the things for memorial purpose, pointing back to the things of Christ, then those nations will be put to death, the scripture says, according to Zechariah 14. And so should we say that prophecy is canceled out? Is it canceled out, or does it have some truth to it? If you don't come up to worship the God of Israel, you will be put to death according to the scriptures. Um, and that is so death will be in that time. Now, where can we find New Testament scriptures to reference that? First Corinthians is one of them. I believe it's 15. I want to say, when it talks about he should rule and reign till he had put all rebels up under his feet. And then it says the last enemy is death. So if he's ruling and reigning for this 1,000 years, which we know he will rule and reign after that, but he will submit the kingdom unto the Father, and the Father will give the kingdom back unto him, because his kingdom is an earth eternal kingdom. But I don't know if you want to add to that, but that's my position on that, just so you can know my position on what I see in the scriptures on that.
Yeah, I think I said a little better now. I mean, well, I'm not entirely sure of how like Heiser would interpret it. I mean, I read his book, but I may have missed that part. I mean, yeah, you could really, you can really go along with that. Like, though, like, I think I'm not to be honest, I'm not really too concerned of what's happening in the future. I'm more concerned with what's currently going on. Namely, what is the kingdom right now? Is it something that's soon to come, or is it right now with God's rule and reign and the spread of the gospel? So, but yeah, I mean, you can interpret it that way. I don't really have too much of an issue with that. It's just like you brought up Matthew 24 earlier, right? I don't know if I would agree really with it being a partial fulfillment, because when you read that whole passage, it says his apostles are asking him, oh, when will these things happen? What will be the sign of the end of the age? The Greek word right there is ion. Refers to a specific time period. So most of that had happened within that particular generation, particularly what Jesus was describing in the Olivet Discourse in both Matthew and Luke. So, like when you're saying it's partial fulfillment, I guess you could say my bone to pick with that would just be that particular issue is the fact that Jesus told him, this is going to happen in your lifetime. That's where I guess I would say would be a little bit problematic, but again, have to look. We'd have to look more into it to get it more clear of what's going on there, particularly in Zechariah.
Right. Do you believe it? Do you believe it? And the reason why I hold it, because it does say the end of the age, which is aeon right there, right? And so,
Yeah.
but that's addressing when should the end of the age be, or shall be thy coming, and also when should these things be, according to what's being answered, what's being talked about up above, when there should not be one stone on another. But then he goes even a little farther. I mean, they go even a little farther to ask them, because they believe that the coming of Christ, that he was coming, basically that he was going to deliver unto them earlier than what they thought it was the kingdom, but that just wasn't the case. And so they didn't know that it was going to be farther, and that Israel had some more stuff to go through. The reason why I have to say, like most people say, well, Christ came in 70 AD. And so, do you believe that there is a literal coming of the Christ? The things that are in heaven must be reflected on to the things that we see on earth.
Well, with that particular one, the 70 AD return that preterists and partial preterists usually argue, it's because of the specific Greek word parousia. Parousia could mean an actual coming, like actual physically return, but it also could mean just coming as in presence, namely not physical coming, but coming like say in judgment. Like sometimes when it says the day of the Lord, or most of the time, it's usually in reference to judgment.
Right.
That's how I would approach it. That when the sign you're coming, I take it more of that, namely with the destruction of Jerusalem and judgment for the rejection of the Messiah, as well as the continual corruption of Jerusalem and sin. And well, yeah, pretty much that's how I look at it.
Right. And so when you start getting to, like, for instance, it says um immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon should not give her light, and the stars shall fall in heaven, and the power of the heavens shall be shaken. And it says, verse 30, it says, then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds, having clouds of heaven, with power and great glory. It says that he shall send his angels with a great sound of the trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds of the earth. Now, when you look at this, this couldn't be 70 AD. And one will look at it and say the reason why this could be 70 AD, because there's a dispersion here, and there's a gathering here, and there's not a dispersion. And so when you look at also too, you have to understand, when you read Daniel, the eschatology that we see that Daniel is looking at is dealing with beast. He's dealing with also the Roman Empire, the Grecian. He's dealing with the Persians and the Babylon. He only seen four. Revelation 17 shows you that there's actually seven, and also there's the eighth, and the next one that proceeds after the eighth is the ninth, which is Christ's kingdom. But how I stop the full preterist and the partial preterist is that it says that in Daniel chapter 7 and also Daniel chapter 2, the image and the beast that we see, which is really the same imagery, but the 10 toes may be kings, where the horns in Daniel chapter 7 is kings too. The mountains deal with kingdoms. Revelations give you it says 5 of those mountains have fallen. We know what a mountain is because it's a kingdom. We see it in Daniel chapter 2. The stone which the builders rejected, that stone became a mountain. So the mountain that we see in Revelation chapter 17 is in regards of it says 5 mountains have fallen. So in John's day, if before John he says 5 have fallen before John's day, the only 5 that could have failed that was in relationship that came out of Mystery Babylon would have been Egypt, which we know when you study the Egypt, there's a lot of masonry that don't lie that comes from the Babylonian system that we see, are not Neo-Babylon, but ancient Babylon, that we see the with the master hunter motif, Nimrod. And so Revelation 17 is giving you Mystery Babylon, the religion, which deals with economic politics and religion. We see that clearly there. We see it there because the system that is in Genesis chapter 12 is dealt with in Genesis 17, and it's also the same system in Egypt. Go check out my show when I talk about the El Arak knife, El Gabar Arak knife. That knife that has the imagery on it which is deals with the master of animal motif, which deals with politics, economics, and religious things, and also the normal palette, how I break down those things, showing you that the customs and also some of the imagery that we see that is shared in Egypt. I mean, that is shared with Egypt and Mesopotamia. It's also in Europe too, just as well. And so when you look at this text, what it's saying is this is that Revelation 17 shows you that the mountains that fell before John's day would have been, in John's day was the Roman Empire. The mountains that would have fell would have been the Grecian. It would have been also the Medes and Persians. It would have been the Babylon. It would have been also the Assyrians. And it also would have been the Egyptians. So you have the Egyptians, which was the first kingdom that we see that comes up out of what we call the mystery Babylon system after the dispersion in Genesis chapter 12, Genesis 11, Genesis 11, and also Genesis 10 up under Nimrod. You have that in Israel. Now, how is that in regards to Israel? Because Israel came up out of Egypt. Then we have also the Assyrian kingdom. And we also have the Babylon. And we have the Medes and Persians and the Grecians. Those five fell. Now, when you look at Revelation chapter 17, it's in regards of seven kingdoms, with the beast itself being the eighth. Now, when you read the text in Revelation Daniel 7, it tells you that the 11th horn, which comes up after the 10 in the Roman Empire, which in John's day, they didn't have 10 divisions or 10 kings. And we know that is because it says these 10 kings will rule 1 hour with that 11 horn. Now, when they rule 1 hour with that 11 horn, it says in those days shall Christ set up a kingdom and destroy those 10 and that 11. Now, if that is the case, then it could never have been 70 AD, because there's a dispersion that happened in 70 AD when the time of the Gentiles has not been yet fulfilled, but is being established, and they're taking over the land. But in Revelations 11, what does it tell you? It tells you that the Gentiles trotting down Jerusalem during that time, and will be trotting it down until Romans chapter 9 actually says, to the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Now, we can look at this type of usage also when we look at, for the iniquity of the Amorites have not yet been fulfilled. This is talking about when God will come back and judge those Amorites as well as Egypt after those 400 years in the fourth generation. So when we look at it, that type of usage is saying that God is going to judge those people, but before he was long suffering with them. That's hence we get Romans chapter 9, with Moses come out in the fourth generation within that time of the Pharaoh, and he says, I will visit the iniquity of those that hate me, of the fathers from those who hate me, the iniquity of the fathers of those that hate me, the children of those that hate me, in the third and fourth generation. Moses come out in the fourth generation. Did the Egyptians try to do away with Israel? They definitely did. And so what I'm saying is this is, all of these nations have something in common with Mystery Babylon, the religious system that we see that I named out, Egypt. And if you do a study on it and you look at the archaeology on it, you'll find out that even the priest of Uruk, which we see to come up out of the Babylon system, go look up the Uruk's period, and you're going to see that there's a priesthood to come up out of that was a perverted priesthood. Before it was, it used to be a righteous priesthood. So all of this I'm saying is that when you look at Matthew chapter 24, if you're going to say that this happened during those times, then you would have to say there was a gathering. And it's also that is a land. You can't forget about Daniel chapter 9 concerning 9 and 24 through 27 concerning the land or the city of Israel. You can't forget that God is going to cause that to be the capital, and that's where he's going to put his name there. And so this is literal. So where do we get to the point to where the church start taking these things as spiritual, in a sense to where it's entirely spiritual and there's no literals to it? Like God is not going to come back and tell people, I've been telling you too many times to hearken unto me, and because you have not hearkened, like he just gonna come back and not judge these people. He gonna come back and judge people. That's what the judgment is for. But that's my position, and that's what I see in the scriptures now, where people start coming in and start getting spiritual concepts is beyond me, and really is because we begin to attach ourselves to a social system that we think that God is not going to judge when he just told you that he's going to, heaven got to be lining up with earth, basically. Earth got to be lining up with heaven, basically. So that's what I'm looking at within these scriptures, that when you look at Matthew 24, the abomination of desolation, that didn't take place in 70 AD. We know Josephus said that place was burned up, that nobody could even get close to the place because it was burned up. Before they could even get close to it, the temple was burned up. But we see in Second Thessalonians, it said that the son of perdition is going to say or stand in the temple of God and say that he is God. Well, what temple is that? It has to be the same temple that we see in Revelation chapter 11, the temple that we see where it says measure the temple, the altar, and the people that worship therein. So these are the only way that can happen is we know there has to be some type of agreement that we see today that would take place within these other people. But that's how I look at it and I view and see what these scriptures are saying. I'm not taking I'm taking a spiritual and a literal approach. There's just what's going on here.
Well, like the preterist partial preterist response would be, hold on, it's in 24. It's where Jesus talks about the gospel being proclaimed to the whole world, and then the end will come. Let me find it real quick. Let's see. That's not it.
I know you're probably going to go to there's a hyperbole that says what Paul says the gospel has been preached, and then it's also in 24 which says this should be proclaimed into all the world. But then you still have to.
No, it's not that one. It's 24:14. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. The response, like the partial preterist and preterist usually respond is the whole world. In the Greek, it's oikomene. It's a Greek word. It refers to primarily a political boundary, particularly in that context, to the boundaries of the Roman Empire. Judea at that time was a Roman province. Basically, the partial preterist response is that the whole world is the gospel being proclaimed to all Rome, and then the end will come, referring to Jerusalem. That's usually the response to that.
Right, and so they'll say the gospel of the kingdom should be preaching to basically the Roman Empire, and for a witness to all nations. Then shall the end come. The end of what?
Basically, the end of the age, particularly the Old Covenant age, the Old Testament age, with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem.
Right, and so when you see the destruction of the temple, right, the gathering that you see, where is the portion that you see of basically God's judgment on the beast system, on the Roman Empire itself? Because remember, during the destruction of the temple, who came and destroyed the temple?
It was Rome.
It was Rome, right? So Rome is coming to judge Israel, but where's the portion to where God is judging Rome, according to the scriptures that we see in Revelation 17 and also Daniel 7 and Daniel chapter 2?
Well, from what I've read, at least from preterist literature, at least mostly from a partial standpoint, the gathering is the expansion of God's kingdom to all nations, gathering the elect, because God's kingdom is no longer, God is no longer, how do you say, I'm trying to think of the word. God is no longer particularly in a specific geography anymore. His kingdom's dominion is now throughout the whole earth, and is basically the church's mandate to go and basically overthrow the principalities and powers that are hostile to God through the spread of the gospel and gathering the elect from all four corners. At least that's what I picked up from some stuff that I've read. Like, where do you see the hole in that one?
Right, right. And so the problem with that is, and I think that what happens is like, for instance, when you look at scriptures like Daniel chapter 2, and then we miss out on God's literal takeover. Like, what you see is the nations judging Israel. You haven't seen the might and the glory and the power of God coming, in a sense to where everybody is being judged, not just the people judging other people, but God Himself are using the people who we have set up to judge the people that we see that's going to be on the earth. And I think that's the portion we missing there. Like when you deal with Daniel chapter 2, and you jump down and you see that it says the interpretation of this dream. It says would you agree that this talks about the Roman Empire is actually in here?
Let's see. It's talking about the four beasts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree the fourth beast is Rome in that context?
Yes.
Or is referring to Rome? And let's see, hold on. You got it right. Yeah. Hold up. Let's see. It's which verse is it again that describes the in the dream that Dan's giving interpretation?
Let's see. This verse is 31. Daniel 2 and 31. It says, "Thou, O King, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron, and part of clay. Thou sawest till the stone, which was cut without hands," which we're going to find out is Christ, "which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and break them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floor, and the wind carried them away," right? "That no place was found for them, and the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth." This is Christ, and this is a stone which the builder rejected. Now 36 is, and it's a plethora of scriptures you can use, even including Zechariah and also Jeremiah, to prove that, as well as Revelations. It says, "This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou art king, O King of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom." So this is the kingdom of Babylon, "power, strength, and glory. And whosoever the children of men dwell, and whatsoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven have he given unto thy hand, and have made thee ruler over them. Thou art this head of gold." So Babylon is the head of gold. "And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and a third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all of the earth." So we know what rose up after concerning Israel, concerning them, was the Medes and Persians, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then he says, now remember, before Babylon was the Assyrian kingdom, but Daniel not giving you that. He just giving you, I'm saying, these four right here, because these are four he's finna be dealing with, who Israel finna be their lastly enemies before Daniel 70 weeks is fulfilled. Now it says, and it says the third. It says, "And after thee shall rise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth." So we know that the second kingdom was the Medes and Persians. The third would have been what? The Grecians, right?
Yeah.
So the fourth,
third one's Greece.
yep. So the fourth would have been what? Would have been Rome, right? So When you look at the fourth, and we know it's wrong because I'm going to show you how we know it's wrong. It says, and the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all things shall it break in pieces and bruise. Look at 41. For whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay, and part of the iron, and the kingdom should be divided, but there shall be in it of strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. So we see that this kingdom will be divided, right? The which is part of the image of this kingdom we see is the toes and also the legs, right? And
Yeah.
are the thighs. And so we see that the kingdom will be divided upon the 10 kings, right? Or it was already divided from the east and the west, the Roman Empire. But so the east and the west is dealing with the legs, right? The east and the west of the Roman Empire. But then it does a division there. There's a dividing there, and that's why they looked at it as the legs. But then you get down to the toes. So you have the toes, which are iron and clay. The toes, which are iron and clay, deals with kings. The toes are kings when you look at the text. Let's read it and look at what it says. It says, and the toes, and it says, and as the toes of the feet were part iron and part of clay, so the kingdom should be partly strong and partly broken. It's a reason for that within these last days. Why is that? Because it's not based upon the royal seed. The royal seed will mingle themselves with the people. So it says, uh, whereas with the seed of man, it says they will mingle themselves with the seed of man, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. It says, in the days of these kings, notice it says the days of these kings, not in 70 AD, but I'm going to show you what this is talking about. That's how I know this is a latter, fulfillment, latter prophecy. And in the days of these kings, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to another people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. And watch what it says, 41. For as much as thou sawest that the stone which was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it break in pieces the iron and the brass, the clay and the silver and the gold, the great God have made known to the king, which shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. Now, one will take this text right here and they'll say, well, Christ came to establish the kingdom of God, right? But
Mhm.
what they didn't tell you is Christ also said, repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. And he talked about also that God will, he says, if my kingdom was of this earth, then will my people come to fight, right? But clearly his kingdom is not of this earth, and clearly there is a fight that will take place. That's what he's saying. It's going to take place, but right now it's not yet time, because this is the grace period, dispensation of grace, of building up the kingdom or professing the kingdom. Now, if this is Christ's kingdom and Christ is ruling and reigning and putting down all rebels, right? Then eventually, there should be a time to where there is no death. And that's just not the case. We still die today. The last enemy is death. And so we see that the fourth beast, which is the Roman Empire, which is the dispersion in 70 AD, who dispersed Israel, is the very ones that we see that is still running things today, in a sense. But as a separated entity, which will gather together back up under 10 kings. And so when you look at this text right here, if you read this and you're saying, as a full preterist or even as a partial preterist, and you're saying that the world that we see today is the world that God desired after 2,000 years of Christ, that's just ain't gonna work. It's just like if I'm telling my child to do something. You got children?
Nope.
Okay, I got children. Or if you are a boss or you trying to run a business, if you telling your children to do something, and this is why I think that as believers that we act like we don't know that God didn't proclaim to Moses that he's merciful, but he will judge your behind. He proclaimed two things there. He said, I'm merciful, but I will deal with the iniquities of the children and on the fathers, those that hate me. We forget about that. We try to make this old peaceful God. God is peaceful. But what we forgetting is that if I'm telling my child to stop doing something and eventually they don't stop doing it, the only way I can show my sovereignty and show them that I'm not planning to show my power is, guess what? If I begin to bring forth judgments on them. And that's the part that we forget about as believers. We think that God is not going to judge the world. Well, he judged the world in the past. What makes you think he ain't going to judge the world in the future? We try to make God out of this. Oh, he's going to love all the homosexuals. He's going to love all the fornicators and the adulterers. No, he says he's going to judge them. All of us, if we're getting off into those type of deeds and wicked things. So I don't know, if you want to add to that, or you have an interpretation of this text, but you go ahead, brother.
Well, for the most part, I would agree with you on that. Pretty much, mostly with the Daniel one. As far as the toes part, well, I say God's kingdom's already at present. It's just not all principalities and powers have been dispossessed. Namely, basically, not everybody's under subjection of Christ. So that's how I would view it. Because, how would you view Daniel chapter 7 with the Son of Man? One like the Son of Man coming before the Ancient of Days and judging the previous empires.
I would view it as he said that he will come, when he said that, and ye shall see what the Son of Man coming with the clouds. And he said that he told them that he's going to come with the clouds, and those clouds that we see is the clouds of witnesses that we see, which is the glory, which is going to be the glory of the saints, is going to come in Revelations 19, that's coming to the Father, which is the kingdom that will come down to transform the kingdom that we see on the earth that's in rebellion against God, which is the eternal kingdom. That's how we view. That's how I will view that in reference to Daniel chapter 7. And in Daniel chapter 7, it says that in verse, like in Daniel chapter 2, it says that the God, that person that will come down, or that king that is a stone that is cut, it says that he will establish the kingdom, and that he will break in pieces those kingdoms that we see that are of the world right now. And so that's how I look at Daniel 7, is them coming before the Ancient of Days, to with the thrones are being seated and the judgment is being seated, to and the kingdom that will be established will be the kingdom of the Son and of the church, and the saints who will judge the world. Know ye not that the saints will judge the world?
So, uh, please correct me if I misheard. You believe that the clouds he's writing are the witness and praises of the saints? Am I misunderstanding on that?
Yes, the glory of God, and it's the glory of God, and the saints with the presence of the glory of God that are that we see that are coming with him, and the angels that are coming with him, which we look at as the clouds, basically.
Yeah, I find that, well, like, mm, you have read Heiss's work, right? That's in Rome.
Yep.
So, yeah, because he, like, that particular passage, the Son of Man riding the clouds, the cloud riding imagery, and how it's a similar motif in ancient Near East,
right,
with Baal and every other deity. Well, basically, you see that same motif right there in that passage, namely the Son of Man is riding the clouds, which is language that is ascribed to a deity.
Right.
And you also see that same imagery in Psalms with Yahweh riding the clouds like a chariot and on a winged horse. So,
now where did I get that from? Because when you look at the cloud of witnesses that we see or when Christ is coming, guess who he's coming with? It tells you who he's coming with. It tells you in Revelations. I told you in Jude, and I also told you in Zechariah. He's coming with the saints. And so what's going to be happening is you're going to have a people that have glorified bodies, who, if you look at it, Revelations, it said their bodies have been clothed in white linen. And so when you look at these people that's going to be coming, it's the glory. So even though we look at the symmetry of when we start looking at the ancient customs, or the or what they said about Baal, or he coming with the clouds, the scriptures tell you that this is what the clouds is representing right here, the glory of God. And the glory of God that we see is what God has done in his redemptive work in the believers, and that we see the cloud of witnesses that is coming with him, and the glory is going to be on them. It's almost just like Ezekiel. What do we see? We see that person that's seeing the glory on them, that was on them, or the brightness, or the light bearers that was on him, it was the glory of God that was on him. And so that's what we're going to see when he's coming with a cloud of witnesses coming to the earth, which is his armies, and 10,000, or that's an innumerable number of his army, basically coming to the earth to judge the earth. And as Christ says, know ye not that the saints, or Paul says, know ye not that the saints shall judge the earth. And then we see the seats as being seated on, set.
So it's revolving around the basically believers replacing the rebellious sons of God motif, correct?
Right, basically that's the thing, rebellious sons of God, but not everybody will be seated in that position. Mainly, I believe it's the third, and that I didn't get that from Heiser's book, but that's what I'm saying. That it's really that third that's being replaced, because if heaven and earth is going to exist, and there's going to be a new heaven and earth, what that means is heaven is still going to be there. And so if heaven is still going to be there, then the Father is still going to be there. But what of the Father that's going to be on the earth? It's going to be the Son, and the kingdom of the which is his kingdom that has been given to him from the Father. So God ain't going nowhere. His presence will dwell here. His Son, which is the essence of God. You know what I'm saying? Which they share the same essence, but this will be one of his dwelling places that he will dwell. Now, me personally, I have a theory, and my theory is my theory that, and this is not scripture, but this is my theory. My theory that the universe that you see is a universe to where you have planets, and on those different planets that we see that's out there, this beyond this solar system, which this solar system was destroyed, I believe, during the fall of Satan, and this was their ram. I believe that's my theory, but I also believe that God's presence and tabernacles dwells. He has tabernacles, and his presence dwells on each one of those planets. You know what I'm saying? But that's just my theory. That's not scripture. I'm just putting that out there. You ain't got to believe that or nothing. I don't expect you to be that, but that's my theory, and that's not scripture. But that don't matter. But what I do see is that he will come back to dwell in a literal and also in a spiritual sense.
Yeah, like, well, basically how I see it is just God basically restoring basically Eden throughout the whole earth, and
Yep.
reestablish basically restoring Eden only on a more global scale with his family, namely the body of believers. And it's the restoration, basically it's a renewing of that council, and it's just basically Eden being restored all over again, name of that image, because like in Genesis 1:26, when God said he's making man in his image, how do you see that? Like
I see
the image.
I see that as a position, also status, and God basically giving man a dominion, and man ruling and cooperating, and God establishing or extending his kingdom, expansion of his kingdom.
Well, because I remember reading this a while back. I forget the name of the author at the moment. It was basically an academic paper. I think it was Society of Biblical Literature. Basically, the guy was looking for any, because he was focusing primarily on Tamut and Tselem. Basically,
Resemblance and
image,
shape.
resemblance, likeness, and image. Yeah. Because the majority that he found throughout every other ancient Near Eastern source, both those terms often refer to an idol image in
Hmm.
the temple of basically a cult image in the image in the temples or tents of a deity. Uh, Basically, how I view it is from that perspective. And name of that man is basically the idol image of God's temple that contains his presence in. What happened in Genesis and what happened with basically what happened in Genesis 3 and Genesis 6, and also the Tower of Babel uh, distorted that image, and as a result, we're in privation,
Right.
namely absence of good. And Christ and that whole mess, plus of what's also mentioned in Enoch with the Watchers, just furthering basically in Genesis 6 with Enoch, in Enoch in literature, that the Watchers that rebelled basically made man more destructive and dangerous and violent and sinful. Uh, Basically, take Kaiser's whole reversing harm on that instance. I mean, Christ came to reverse all that damage through his life, death, and resurrection. And basically, the whole world is basically restored as man is God's temple, essentially, and also that cult image. And that were to restore that whole temple domain motif through the spread of the gospel, and by being by being a body of believers.
Right. And I definitely agree with that. And but when you look at the scripture also too, it says it calls it the firmament of heaven. And when you look at the firmament of heaven, what that is dealing with the expansion of God's lofty abode. And so when you look at other ancient texts, like for instance, when you look at overthrowing Apep, when you talk about Nebuchadnezzar coming in the form of Khepera, when you read that text and you look at that ancient text, which I don't hold it as something that is inspired, but one of the things it says in there is that it's the evolving of uh, this the evolving of um, Nebuchadnezzar coming into the material world. And so he's before anything ever existed, he existed alone. And it says that the things he brought from himself polarities, and it says that he came into the form, he formed all matter, and it says he came into matter. And so when you look at that text, basically it's saying that everything before that preceded before matter was the word or was information. And so when he speaks, he brought into existence matter, but then the word itself was made flesh in a sense of himself coming down and evolving, or the evolutions of Ra. It says the evolutions of Ra, and he's cycling, and he's the source of all life. And then it talks about he's how he builds the material world, but then he brings forth man. He brings forth man. And so when you look at the biblical text is God expanding himself, or expanding his kingdom, his lofty abode. But one of the ways that we only know of what expansion is because we expand ourselves daily. And so when it says that the image, but we expand it in not the way that God would do it, but in the sense of that God made us to procreate in our way. And one of the ways we expand ourselves, because we can't do it to where we are self-existing to do it, but we do it by God creating us a counterpartner, is by way of uh, procreation. And it says that the two became one flesh. And so when you look at what that's really talking about is looking at once the two came together, they became one flesh. And that one flesh that you see is expansion because it is that child. And in that child is a distinct person just as well as the mother and the father that is in that child. So we have genetically, they are in that child. And also that person is distinct themselves. And so we look at it, that's the way the expansion takes place. But we look in the way of how God expands his world. He expands his world as being self-existent and makes polarities. He don't need to expand that way, but he gave us the ability to expand that way. He makes from nothing basically, or from himself basically. And so when we look at the text, it's the same way in Genesis. God has given man he's expanding himself. He's making man in his image. Men that we see fell from that dominion, whereas Christ came, which is the word of God that has become flesh with the and he is the example of what man should actually be, of having the fullness of God in him and leading men back unto the Father, and showing people what image should be portrayed when it comes to what we should be doing as human beings, and how we should honor the Father, and how the Father is glorified through us. I'm saying by way of uh his spirit. You know what I'm saying? By way of, so that's what I see in Genesis is God giving man this type of dominion, and in this dominion that God also wants man to form moral character, and that's the way we do when we make the AI. We want AI to be able to have the responsibility of being morally sound. Therefore, they don't go and make these different types of mistakes and these different type of things and destroying things, but they have some type of um, moral character formed in them to where they can handle situations and affairs in that dominion that was given unto them by that administration. That's how I see that scripture. To see those scriptures right. But I agree with what you're saying too, because that's definitely part of it too.
Yeah, like with AI, I don't really have much of a problem with it. My only issue probably would be how it's used, because in general, it's used. Technology itself is generally used to help improve our lives,
Right.
alleviate and improve it, and basically to manage it better and shift some of the burden off of us. The problems not so much with the object itself; it's the possessor of it and their intentions. And
Right. I agree.
because based off what I've studied from anthropology and my interactions with people in general, uh, people are by nature irrational and destructive and insane. And when you give somebody, uh, like when you're given something that is meant to be used for good in the hands of somebody who is all three or four of those, more likely than not, they're going to use it in a not so good way, a destructive way, and twist it to their own means,
Right.
which
That
we constantly do on a daily basis.
right. And you know why is that though? That's because they're in a world without God. In other words, what I mean by that is they're not being instructed properly, and they're given half of the information, especially them being put in a hostile environment. If you put it in a hostile environment, of course you got choices that you're gonna have to make. But if you don't have the instructions to make the right choices, then clearly you're gonna be in a position to where it's not good. But also you can be put in a good environment like Adam was and still make the wrong decisions because you can be tempted or yield to something other than those instructions. And part of that is about forming moral character in you to being obedient, because obedient is definitely important. Now, if you're not obedient, then clearly something gonna have to die. Something gonna have to take the place, or something gotta die, because if you're not obedient, then you're not working as a unit no more. The whole heavens and the earth works as a unit. Even when you talk about from a subatomic level, or even fundamental particles, these things, yeah, they work individual, but they still form what you call a unit. There's a unit that is with that. And so if something is not operating within that like it should, then it's not in one accord, as Paul will say. And that's why he says he must gather all things that are together, that are in heaven and on earth. So the everything must be delivered into the kingdom of his dear son, and they must conform to that very image of the son. And so if they don't conform to that image, then we already see what's predestined for those that don't conform to that image, and what's predestined for those that do conform to the image of the son. And so when you looking at what the text is basically saying, is when you're dealing with even with the AI, or whatever the case may be, all of this stuff is in reference to man trying to create something within a fallen world that is apart from God, trying to bring about their own righteousness apart from God, or trying to get back to what you said before, to the garden where the tree at, trying to get that eternal inheritance by way of their own deeds, and apart from God, rather than leaning to the instructions to come to what we see to get us back to God, which is through Christ.
Yeah, like, and that part that kind of touches on the whole free will thing. And do we have free will? We don't. Uh, I lean more towards a compatibilist position ish, though. We do have a will; it's not entirely free, and the will that we have, it's to be aimed towards a specific end goal and then purpose. Not you can do whatever you want, and that's because a lot of times sin is partially because it's partially just innate in us in a sense. Uh, the other factor is it's also a lot of it is also from an environment. Like you noted, if you put somebody in a hostile environment, um, and they experience that every day without right instruction, they're just gonna really just view everything around them in a hostile manner, and then leads towards that particular direction that you noted.
All right. And so I have a view that my view is like, it's like that it's in so much like that you have two options, and those two options is life or death, and those are the actual two options that God has given all throughout the Bible to everybody: life and death. And in those options, you can, you're limited uh to those very two options. And if a person chooses uh death, or by way of doing certain things that causes death, then God has the power, he's sovereign, basically, to deal with you in a manner to where, you know, he's gonna be the one who's going to judge you and put you in that place that's for those who does wickedness. The second thing is life. He has the power also, and he is the keeper of that. You know what I'm saying? He is the guardian of that, to give you that life, and he has the power to do so. And so that's how I view it. Now, free will is the power to do otherwise from the instructions of God. You have the power to do otherwise than what God has instructed you to do. He has given you that, sovereignly given you that, by by uh by giving you that. He's still sovereign, but he has given you that choice. I'm saying, so that's how I view it. You know, there is free will, choice, and we see that even after Adam sinned, man has always still been given choice. And matter of fact, man still, even Adam was put in a good situation, uh besides, moral character had to be formed in him. And so when we look at our children, moral character had to be formed in him. So man wasn't made perfect. He was made good, but he wasn't perfect. So the perfection lies in, we see the following the moral character that God has placed in them, at that time, on how, you know, uh how they would have viewed it at that time. Now, that really perfection is Christ, because he's the one who is the image of that perfection. And he says, if thou will be perfect, follow me. So the shortcomings that we having is because we lack instructions. He said, my people, they have a lack of knowledge. And if you've not been instructed by God, clearly this world ain't gonna be ran properly. And so if you teaching your kids certain things, not to its entirety of what God wants to be taught, because we know in part, then you're going to have a world that has these shortcomings. Why? Because it's apart from God. And so when you start looking at what God is saying, that how he wants you to administrate your house or rule, just follow instructions. If you don't follow those instructions, then you doing things apart from God and trying to establish your own righteousness. And we know what happens with that. And that's why we have the world that we have now. We have a world that when children come in the world, the morality that they're given is just a speck of it because of their conscience that's in them. But they also have to be taught by way of the word, or what's coming from their parents. And if they are not being taught what God has taught them through the spirit, then clearly you're gonna have a world that's chaotic like it is. And they're not gonna know what to do in situations like when they sat down and they ate the bread and Christ showed that he could suffice them with little, but take up fragments afterwards. And he tells them, well, don't follow me. You only follow me for this bread. Don't labor for the bread. He says, but man shall not live by bread alone, but every word that proceed out the mouth of God. So he knows that the beast system is a system that's built upon, what is it? The deeds of Nimrod. Nimrod was a mighty hunter. So the mighty hunter, what does he do? He brings bread. He establishes his kingdom with bread. But there's nothing spiritual. There's no spiritual attachment back into the Father, and that's why it's a destructive force that has to be shut down. And that's why they came and shut it down in the beginning. And so what I'm saying when we look at it is that Christ shows that he can suffice us if we just be obedient. You know what I'm saying? And if you don't be obedient, then we see that, hey, uh, what happens with that?
Yeah, it's about using your will for telos, for an end purpose, to an ends. Primarily the end, primarily being Christ and his kingdom, for the most part, for basically in general.
Right. And
Yeah,
so,
I subscribe more to that than say, like, because my own, like with free will, my contention mostly is um two two parts. One I mentioned earlier is there are some instances where the idea of free will is questionable, mostly in how our brains mostly how our brains influence our behavior, and also for as well as say social and other factors. But that's for another period. The other My other issue with like free will is like how it's defined, like the uh, the like to choose to do good or bad, it's your choice. Uh, my main problem with that is uh, it's kind of nihilistic because there's no real end purpose in mind. Well, particularly how free is defined in where we live, primarily in the West, where you make your own choices, etc. Which is where I lean more towards the um, end purpose of will than say free will in itself. Uh, I'm not sure if that came off. I'm not sure if that came off clear to you, or
Right. So
Yes.
so basically, you said say it again. You said what did you say about the Western and at that last part?
Um, Primarily where we live at, like here in the U.S. and the West, the like where we live at as in the particular society, country we live in, like when how does it understand the word free itself?
And see, that's the in terms of I wouldn't really be concerned with in terms of how we from a westernized perspective understand free, but from a biblical perspective of what we see of what free is, which is the power to do otherwise according to the choices that you've been given. Uh all through the Bible we see that when God say our person is when we look at what free is, if we associate it with the Bible, we're going to see that God has given man uh two options, and it seems to me it's life or death. But within those options, we see that there's things that can lead down the wrong paths, and there's things that we see that is the right path, and following instructions on the right path. And there's things that we see that when a man wants to do something that is opposite of what God told him to do, then clearly he's going to go down the path of destruction. And I think that's what the Bible definitely teaches us, that where God gave man, and the whole story of Genesis 3 is God giving man an administration and telling him how to run that administration. But if you look at the key passages there, it tells you that there is something that is really the accuser that is there, who is before man, that we know he fell prior to, but he's in opposition of that administration, and God is telling man to keep that which he has given him and guard that. Now the moment he doesn't keep or guard that, we see that that's assignment of guarding something that is dear to him, and that where he meets with God at is given to the cherubim. It's given to the cherubim to guard something which that was man's place at first. And so what took man out of that place is man being disobedient. And so I think that the choice that was given him from the beginning was life or death. And so clearly, in order for him to form that moral character that was needed within him, would have been him basically being obedient. And when he wasn't, he was disobedient, then life lesson is being learned. And we see it today, the thousands of years later, what we see on the earth now because of what disobedience brings about. And so God has seen rebellion and disobedient, and this is why he created what we call evil, which is the word ra'ada or ra, which means misery and calamity, because he will judge or bring calamity and misery on the natural or spiritual beings when they begin to do things, sin against him, basically transgress against him.
Mm. Yeah, I got it. Yeah, I get that. Like that one part you mentioned, choose life or death. Uh, in the same passage, I believe it's Moses also uh, pleads, choose life. Oh, choose life. Don't go. Basically, he insists that they choose life. Go to that.
Right.
Uh, so so you see will being named towards an end goal in that instance.
Right. And so that's why Christ kind of give you two gates. Well, actually, he gives you a wide. He says the straight is the path, right, that leadeth to either the destruction or even to that which is the righteous, which has a narrow path, which is narrow, straight and narrow. So what he's saying is that there's a straight gate, but inside the gate is two paths. And so it's easy to get to this gate, you know what I'm saying, but the way of death and destruction is just straight way. After you get in the gate, it's just straight way because it's easy to just walk that path. But when you start dealing with the other pathway, which is straight and narrow, when you enter in, and then when you enter in, there's this the straight and the narrow path. That path is a road of difficultness. But the reason why it's difficult is because the opposition that we see that comes while you own that path. And we see that opposition was clearly looked at by the terms that we see of guard and keep, protect or be circumspect. When it talks about till the garden or keep the garden, or what when we look at the word garden, the enclosure that we see there of what the garden was, and the place that God will meet with man. This is spiritual and physical things. This is a spiritual spiritual and a material reality, because we're trapped in we're attached to the material world. And so because we are housed in the material world, all of this is like even when you deal with Kemet. If you know anything about Kemet or Egypt, or their theology deals with, we're just passing through here. The existence of man is passing through here, and there is a dualism, and that dualism we see there's a life after death. And so when you begin to go, when you look at the Pert M. Heru, when a person, the book of coming forth, when you look at the Amduat, which is the world, that text, that's the world that you come to, this after death. And so you preserve balance and order in both places. It has to be preserved in both places. So when you leave, if you preserve order in this place, once you leave that place, you have the proper enchantments. Once you leave the natural world, you have the proper enchantments for the spiritual world, to carry on into that world and to make passage in that world just as well too. And before you come back and cycle again, that's what they believed in. Now in the biblical text, it's coming up out of the material world, being, going through forming moral character, forming these different things that we see, these lessons within the material world, until we are basically given these glorified bodies, that we're given by believing on Christ and following his instructions, being obedient to the faith, and then being transformed. And once we're transformed through those instructions, then basically we take on this inheritance that we see. And that's the same thing that we see within the what you call it. And so the people who speak in the Amduat, they preserve order for those that are in the material world too, because they carry on the existence after death. And so they cause the very natural things, who they was they might personify the sun as someone who's the power behind the sun, to cause the sun to cause to be moving through the world, and look down on their people. You know what I'm saying? And so our
Mhm.
source of life and our source of existence is the Father, and he has providence, and he is the cause of everything to exist as it is and move as it moves. But you know,
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with those who subscribe to Kemet, who subscribe to that particular brand. Um, I'm not too familiar with Kemetic arguments, other than just a few. Other than that, a lot of them tend towards myth. At least some I've seen tend towards a mythicist position,
mhm.
or try to say Amen is referring to Amun Ra, that nonsense. And uh, that particular part you mentioned about how they need to live to maintain order, because the little bit of I studied of Egyptian history from a history class, uh, it were you referring to Ma'at in that instance?
Yeah, balance, yeah, order, yeah.
Uh, I don't see how they could do that when the concept of Ma'at was highly contingent on the Egyptian kings, the pharaohs. Uh, Ma'at was primarily the responsibility of the pharaoh and their conformity to the standard of the gods, and etc.
Right.
I don't really see how they could fulfill that role when that
Because
role
they
was.
they become they become the gods. They become the blessed dead. It's called the Aku. They go into the Aket. That the Aku is the blessed dead. The Aket is the primordial mounds. It means the beginning, set tepi, the beginnings of time. And so when you go into the Aket is where you see that they become that. Like when you look at the Pert Emeru within the scribe Ani, the one that he has, if you look at it, after you get past what is it? What's it? After you get past the Croc, I forgot his name. His name is Maut or something like that. When you after you get past him, then you see the feather is being weighed, because if you don't judge yourself correctly or you don't have the proper enchantment, then you are given to the Croc, right? I think it's Demut or something. Amut. That's his name. It's Amut. You give him to Amut, and you're thrown into the lake of fire, and you to not exist anymore. If you pass through, if you notice, he becomes Osiris. He faces Osiris, but he becomes Osiris. And Osir or Wasir or Asar, he becomes that. And if you know anything about Asar, Asar is also an agriculture god in Mesopotamia and also in the Levant area. And he's a war god just as well too. But if you notice, he's green. He's an agriculture god. And the reason why is that is because they believe that part of the order that had to be maintained was also through agriculture. This is why at the end, the reed is the bundle, the reed or the that you see that's tied in a knot as the key of life, and it's attached to a staff, which is called a bundle reed or a Jed pillar. It's called a Jed pillar. That Jed pillar is attached to the bundle to the Ankh, or the life symbol is a key, but a bundle tied into a knot, actually a reed tied into a knot. That is the staff. Osar was the staff of life. In other words, when Egyptians became to the point to where they can maintain or be sustain themselves and be stable, it was through agriculture, to where they didn't have to move around for hunting and gathering anymore. So the Asar he's actually a Levant. That's how we know that he comes from. You having Sumerologists, they say that Sarlini, which is a god that is the same god, or has the same epithets of what we see of the Asar that is in Egypt, and also the Asar that we see that is in the Levant area. And so when you look at these deities, when you look at the balance and order, the balance and order has to be preserved by humans just as well too. Now, the balance and order that we see existed in the story of Nebuchadnezzar with him, because when you look at the hieroglyphics, there is it's not a woman though. It's called Ma, and it's a dude with a beard, and he's the order, and his counterpart, I believe, is Ma'at for some reason. But you know, a lot of Egyptians don't want to talk about that or whatever. But with people who deal with Kemet, and so there is an order that must be preserved, and the order that we see that they must preserve. As a king, it's your duty to preserve order, to govern as well as politics, economics, and in your religious festivals. That's your he has on the priest cap. The white cap is the priest cap, which is the northern cap, which is the Nisu cap, and then you have the Desheret, which is the war cap, the red cap, which he went in war against the Asiatics of the Amu. And so all of this is in reference, his theology is in reference to his land. It's in his land. The primordial mounds, the pyramids is his place. The Ampu, which is the Sphinx, which is their cherubim to the doorway, which is the false door, which is what we see within Christ says, the symmetry of Christ said, "I am the door." He's saying that for a reason, and he said he's their Passover, he's the door, and the same way that the Pharaoh tried to stop the Passover from life unto death, which is Christ, which is the blood, is placed on the door, which passes you from life to death. I mean, from death to life. He's that. He's the door. And so they had false doors back then called the Seret facade. You can go look it up. And the false door was a entrance of a spiritual entrance that you entered into. And Christ is saying that he's that door. There's no other door but this door right here. And so those who sitting back and know about what he's talking about, they know these things. You know what I'm saying? They looking at him like he says, they would know that these are builders, but this is the master builder. You know what I'm saying? And so that's why Paul says we are master builders. We're not those builders that you see this in Genesis 11 is building against God. They try to create a doorway or a passageway or a high place during that time. No, these are builders that we see that know where the door is at and the entrance of that cherubim that leadeth unto life, and that's Christ. And so that's basically what that's dealing with.
Yeah, like regarding that text you were referencing, like, is it primarily like just individuals in general, or is it referring primarily towards the king as well as the wealthy class, primarily the landowners in the ancient context? Because right now I'm in a group where we're studying ancient Near Eastern literature, and right now I'm touching on stories of Ugarit and ancient Canaan and stories from there. One of the things that I came across earlier was the disruption of, say, the economy and the politics, and as well as potential famine and drought, was because the kings were not really carrying out their duties. So that concept of mod is related to that. So based off of, sorry, go ahead.
They should preserve order and balance. And so when you look at the text I'm talking about is the Papyrus of Ani, the scribe. There's many books that we see to where when a person was dying, it was only offered to the royal people. So when a person was dying, he would start his preparation for these different what is it, the enchantments. They cause him to make it through and have great safe passage. Now, in that passage, he has to be balanced out with the feather, which is the Mayat consists of order, balance, and principles, and all these different divine things that we see. But he himself has to walk in that path just as well to establish order for those who are in the that world, and also the balanced order in the natural world. So they have what you call the opening of the mouth ceremony, and where if you look at on the papyrus, they open the mouth and they put certain things or certain enchantments within him so he can have passage and to speak for the living as being the dead, and to preserve order on his side. He becomes Ra. He becomes Osiris. He becomes all these different, the blessed dead, these different deities that we see. He's that now to carry on those and cause the world on the other side to exist just as well, to help his people on the other side. So that's the Papyrus of Ani, and what we see. And also, if you get that, go to the online pyramid text, um, and you can go to there. You can read by E.A. Wallace Budge, The Creation of the Gods and Their Stories, and it's gonna tell you like all of these different things on the different pyramid texts that you can read, the papyrus, and they have one that's in there where eventually is if he does not do that and preserve order, then nature begins to judge him, or either the gods that move nature, you know what I'm saying, that move the material world, those deities or divine ones will cause the material world to send like the storms and different cause the land not to uh, uh, be replenished, you know what I'm saying. And so it's a story in there talking about Hathor, how she comes together with Ra, and they are finna judge men, and she takes it too far, but she leaves a remnant of man, but only because the gods leave a remnant of man, but only because Ra, you know what I'm saying, which is also the tears that brought forth man when he cried, as well as the tears of the moon too, just as well, and brought forth man. Uh, um, that in that story, I believe that that's talking about the flood of Noah, how the that she, but they was drowned in beer. When she got drunk or something like that, the beer overflowed and they was drowned in beer or something like that. I believe that's talking about the flood. And I believe that they had a flood story within their time, as well as when you start talking about the primordial mountains, because Akhet is something that we see is in Sumer too, just as well, upon among some of their seals. But that's what it's talking about. But it's different. It depends on what creation story you're talking about or what papers you reading. I have several few that I read from, and some of the stuff that I study, and just as well too. But there's like 6 creation stories within Kemet, and these are creation stories are really different. The contentions of Horus and Seth, the homosexual stuff, is basically yeah, what that is basically is somebody who had this person had a perverted mindset, but at the same time these are different groups of people that people don't know about, like the followers of Seth and the followers of Heru or Horus. These are followers. There's different when you look at the land how it was broken down, there's different sides and different 6 creation stories that they all came into one, and that they can maintain so that nobody won't have disagreements with each other within the gnomes of the Nile Valley of Kemet. And so there's different uh geographical locations of the followers of Seth and the followers of Horus, and these contentions are contentions between 2 people, but the story is being told from a person that is perverted to try to belittle, like in a sense of where they say, well, a person is not gay if he's the doer of the thing, but the one that is gay, he is the one who's getting done. This is actually what we see in prison, where they was doing the same thing back then. These contentions are between people who trying to belittle each other, of one following Seth and one following Horus or Heru, and these are different groups of people, and they had different groups of capitals at that time. But then Norman them or the kings and the priests come to preserve those things in those stories and collaborate those things into one, and causes Upper and Lower Egypt to be joined together, you know what I'm saying, as one, and unify them by ways of economics, politics, and religion. So that's what that's dealing with.
Mm. Yeah, but again, I don't know a whole lot about Kemet other than, like I mentioned earlier, and uh, also the gods that the Egyptians believed in were very abstract and very impersonal. The only hint of any sort of interaction was either a dream or a vision here and there from primarily to the pharaoh. Other than that, they didn't really have any correspondence or interact with people like deities in the ancient Near East did.
Right. Yep. And so, yeah, and that it's what made me start studying a lot of this stuff is, and getting a lot of books on it, is because uh, I wanted to I wanted to know what the beast system was. I was studying eschatology, and I wanted to know what it was, and I kept seeing a lot of these different symbols, or what Nimrod was doing. I wanted to know what Nimrod was doing. What I read Josephus, and I was reading certain things, and I said I wanted to know what this is. And then when I started reading Genesis, I started looking off to Michael Heiser, and I started getting off to it. He added more to it because it started talking about what the garden was and this and that. And then when I seen the garden, and I studied Kemet before I actually started dealing with the Bible. And when I started seeing that there was like some things there, like for instance, that a lot of believers don't know about, is that there's archaeology of there's arks of covenants before the Ark of Israel. And so when you tell people that, they'll be like, "Oh, no way," or this and that, this and that. Yes, there is. There's actually proof that there is. But the difference between what God is doing in the biblical text, what the Most High is doing in the biblical text, He's showing you that I am your standard. I am your strength, basically. And He's having them to contest the false ideologies. Now, what an ark is actually a throne. And so what will happen is that these groups of people will go to battle, and they would take their ancestors with them on thrones, or either their kings and priests with them on thrones, and carry. I mean, the priests would carry them through the battles, or either through a chariot or something like that. They would carry them through the battle while they having battle, and they will have standards. That's why if you look at the word nature or the hieroglyphs, it's a flag and it's also an axe, because you got to get that bread, and the person that got the bread, they did it by the axe, and the standard represents the name of your deity. So when Moses and Joshua is fighting, he's holding up his hand. And when he's holding up his hand, he's holding up the standard of God, and the Ark of the Covenant, and those different things is basically representing Israel carrying their priests. I mean, their priests carrying their ancestor, which is the Most High, which is the Creator of the heavens and earth. He's the true one that rides the clouds. He's the true one that is the ruler, who is sovereign, and and so when they're marching with their arcs, and then you have they have what you call solar barks or solar boats with their deities on them, and they going through and they marching with them and this and that, and they got their priests carrying these things, and they got their standards. I'm saying they got their temples too. The Aket is the pylons that you see of Isis is the primordial mounds is and represents the twin peaks. So it's a lot of information to where that when you read this information, it'll help you look at the Bible and say, man, I can explain this Bible, and all I need is like chapter 3, probably Genesis chapter 3 all the way to 10 or 11, and you could be able to confound somebody real easy with what happened, and why we're in the place that we're in today, and where what certain things Christ was saying that everybody would have looked at and would never known, but the people who was behind the system and in the system, and he says, take these things hence, for my house should be a house of prayer, but you have made it a house of merchandise. That's the beast system. That's what it does. It does that. It uses religion to basically gain merchandise, and that's what Israel was doing. The keepers was doing, and God was like, nah, that ain't what that's about. And so that's what it is today. We talk about the mark of the beast and this spiritual type of way that you have to take in order to buy, sell, or trade. All of this stuff is really talking about that system that God overthrew at Genesis and is going to overthrow. God chased that. He chased all of that. Right when that happened in Genesis, the very next chapter, we see Abraham. God is coming through a nation, and he's going to bring about that nation that's going to destroy that system. And it's not ironic that God sent Israel down into Egypt to deal with one of the biggest, baddest people that was at that time, which was Egypt. And he sent little old Israel to knock that kingdom down. That's why it says 5 have fallen. And Israel went right down into that. He's chasing that system, and he's going to get those 70 back, which he lost through that system. That's what Michael Heiser actually teaches too.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm mostly familiar with his divine council work and some ancient areas and stuff, but I don't know, like I've heard him say over and over again that I don't want to touch on eschatology, and yeah, I'm not too sure about his eschatology. I know he holds to the now but not yet, basically somewhat partial prayer-ish view, but other than that, I haven't really kept track lately because I've been busy with school and work and all that, and also the side study.
Nobody wants to touch on eschatology because a lot of it is subjective, but you know what I'm saying, for people who really got the desire to do it and to warn people of this system and what God said that what was going to happen within this system, it is happening. Then you have to be you have to understand at these times, because like for instance, we in times where if people don't know, people are giving themselves over to bread entirely to feed themselves and compromising, and we will do it. We all do it, you know what I'm saying? But for the most part, I think that God is going to bring us to a place to where we're going to wholly trust on him and depend on him and not on to who's in office or not, or you know what I'm saying? Because he does say in the scriptures to where the this system and the world is going they're gonna fall hard, you know what I'm saying? And I think that that's gonna be the time and testing of us as believers to see what we gonna do. Is we gonna succumb to those things because we don't see Christ speedily coming back, or what we
Yeah.
gonna do?
Well, I mean, he, eschatology has its role, but it's not the whole end goal. That's how I view it. I, and I slightly guilty-ish on that as well. But again, that's due to some factors that's due to factors of like work and school, and also a side study and now part of basically ancient Near East type stuff. Like uh, we're mainly studying stuff about Ugarit and ancient Near East, and
Hmm.
topics of a choice, anything related to ancient Near East. I've chosen to study ancient Egypt because I had a brief introduction to that one in my history class, and I want to expand that even further because uh, I view that as because it can come in handy primarily if and when I ever come across somebody who subscribes to Kemetic beliefs, because
Right. Like if you know,
then sorry, go ahead.
if you know, like everybody know, like they come to me about a lot of stuff that like when it comes to dealing with people that's in Kemet because I had to study that. And the reason why I had to study that is because, like you said, a lot of people are leaving and going back to that type of way, even to some even some Babylonian Talmudic type of stuff, and also even back to they uphold and uplift Egypt. Even white people. You know what I'm saying? Because at first they was the ones who was upholding Egypt. Really lifting it up, like really magnifying it. Like man, like it's even on our dollar to where they was magnifying it so well. Now it's coming to where black people, they always was upholding in a sense, but now it's like they're leaving the Bible, to say, well, the Bible is the slave man's religion and all this crazy stuff, and they will leave the Bible to uphold to Egypt. And what they don't understand is that Africa, or what we call the continent of Africa today, is that was not everybody's spiritual system, but in that geographical location. And so it's kind of weird. But everybody who wants to uphold that system that we see, um, they do it either before or after they leave the Bible. And it's not just them that's doing it. It's a lot of people that's really doing it. Just tracing back to that the ancient Egyptian type of system. So we had to ask ourselves, why are people doing it? So you got the right idea to let's study this stuff because you got to know the method and operation of the devil. And I'm not saying that everything that Egypt did was bad, but there is a lot of that stuff that we see that it got some stuff to it that we need to warn people about.
Yeah, well, people in general need to study it just so they understand primarily what these ideas and what the history is about, and also what you just mentioned, to understand how they think and how to spot where they're wrong. Because uh, Kemet gets away with a lot of, at least as far as I've seen, they're like Hebrew Israelites. They get away with a lot of stuff they do primarily because people don't really know anything about them or the source that they're or the sources that their beliefs arise from. Because it's it's just weird. But again, I don't know a whole lot about them other than the brief interact stuff I've seen them like arguing with Hebrew Israelites on the street in Harlem. and think also with Divine Pros. Think also with Ron Shields as well. And the few I've come across who espouse mysticism that Jesus is either myth or the Bible's copy from Egyptian lore or place. Don't. Um, yeah, that I don't really see how that follows at all. Because, well, there's some similarities, but there's also the differences as well. And but yeah, again, I don't
Well,
really run with it.
Ron Shields has this. He has this. What's it called? It's called the Minority Report, and he deals with a lot of the archaeology and pottery and stuff in Kemet, and it's awesome, man. And he did some of it on YouTube on Sonetta Show. And what was good about it was because he was bringing out some of the biblical narrative, but showing that how a lot of the things from Kemet, a lot of some of the Asiatic customs and some of the people that was in the South and how they moved up to the North, and some of the people that was there before they started even the civilization of Kemet. And it gets off to a lot of information. Now he has some great information, and he raises a lot of questions to where if he had not raised those questions, I would have never went and looked at it. And because he raised those questions, I did go and look at it. And a lot of that stuff that made me look at some of those things was even within some of the church history, to where I started to look at certain things. They start to make certain errors and do a lot of stuff, mainly within like the 3rd or 4th century, even somewhere in the 1st century. And where do we get some of these certain theologies or certain why I say theology, certain theological perspectives from? And a lot of that stuff, man, the church is like it is today is because of we fell in so far away from what apostolic teachings was bringing. It's not even there in the scriptures, like. And it's not just among the Israelites, but it's also among Christians too, because the Bible says judgment is coming first in the house of God, if anything, first there. And so when we look at the judgment that's coming first there, just like the same reason God came to Israel first to judge them and give them instructions, is the same thing that God is doing within the church, because the church is falling away because of false teachings. And a lot of the stuff that we see comes about at the Reformation, I believe, because within that Reformation, they was trying to get away from what the Catholics was teaching, but they established a lot of their own. And reason why I say that is because a lot of it deals with Western, a Western type of mentality or teachings that we see that comes from the West. And when you get to the first thing, when you get over here to America, that's the first thing they start to teach you is Western history, and start to teach you Calvin, Augustine, and all these different guys. And they but when you start to really search back, you start looking at Augustine and Calvin, a lot of their teachings is a lot of Gnosticism. And so we'll look at it and say, well, that ain't Gnosticism, but it is Gnosticism. And I see that we're using those certain teachings today, and half of the church don't even know it, that we're teaching that. And we wonder why the power of God ain't operating in the church. Well, it's how we view God. We have made God to where he doesn't he's not a person no more. He's not a in other words, he doesn't have he's not when it comes to relationship, this person is horrible. You know what I'm saying? We know that he don't, he's not like man when it comes to a relationship base, but we know that what the attributes that we have in us to love and the different things of hate and emotions, even though we're not balanced with them, but we know that God has these things. And so where do we get where does it come from to where you make God to where he's not caring, but at the same time he comes and he sends his son to die for the world and wash their feet. And also he puts man in position to have dominion with him. And so we say, well, that's anthropomorphism, but what is the object or what is real there that could cause us to grasp from that? What is God trying to show us through that? If you're saying that, well, he may say that his arm is a wing, or well, that can represent swiftness, but it's still something represents something. The object of it that's real is that he's fast, or he covers you with his wing. He's carrying, and so there's a true object is there. And so when we start looking at how how they teaching us to view God, it's like it's not real. It's not real at all. And God is real. And what we face in our real world is how we relate to each other. And so this is why Christ says, how you ain't never seen God before. We ain't never seen God before. And you sitting there and you see your brother every day, but you don't treat him right. If you look at that text, that's really deep. And so we're using these theological perspectives from people with these weird Gnostic views on how they view God, which is inhuman. No, God has he's not affectionate or none of those things. He has none of those things. And they're teaching us that same stuff. And the theology that we're being taught is why the church is in the position that it is now, because they don't know nothing about relationships. And therefore, that's how a Calvinist or different people can sit back, that have these different perspectives, can gnash and tear people apart. But the worst of all the Christians was the Catholics and the Calvinists. The Calvinists become worse than the Catholics now, because they puffed up in knowledge and they don't have no relationship with God. A lot of them don't have no relationship with God. They don't know how to worship anymore. They don't know how to pray anymore. They don't evangelize anymore, because they've been taught that God is this God to where you don't have to do that. You know what I'm saying? And but he told you to do that. You know, they have this viewpoint of what God is, and you know, and that's what I see. And I'm not knocking them. I still love them, but they have made God to where he he has no affection. He is not he doesn't know anything about relationships or anything. He's just horrible. You know what I'm saying? And I'm just keeping it honest. And that's not the way the Bible teaches that at all. And so we can see why there is no power in the church today.
Well, as far as John Calvin goes, I would agree with you. And I speak as a former Calvinist. To quote David Bentley Hart, well, I'm not going to quote him, but he was interviewed not too long ago, and he talked about how Calvinists always will bring up that, oh, you didn't read, you misunderstood Calvin, you didn't read him. He did read him, he understood him pretty well, and he was an idiot, brilliant idiot. Went as far as describe him as a moral cretin. Basically, under Calvinism, the saint is more. Let's see how I say. I forget the exact word, but basically, he was saying. I'm just paraphrasing. Basically, he said that under Calvinism, a saint is more like compassionate than God. Well, it also depends on which Augustine, because there's the first Augustine, which argue for free will, and then there's the second Augustine, who, in response to Pelagius, retorted to determinism from his own Manichaean days.
Yeah, and I'm just really starting to get off into those things, and I never knew. And what made me start the whole thing with the Calvinist thing is what made me start to look into the early church. And when I started looking to the early church, I'm not talking about the first century, the second century. We started looking at the third century. This dude at UFC, this UFC is brutal. This dude knocked this dude out. The referee just let this guy just beat on this dude like 7 to 8 punches, and he should have stopped that fight, because that is ridiculous. Look, he's still letting it go. He hitting this dude like 7 to 8 times. That fight was over when he got hit the first time. But yeah, but what made me I looked into it and I was like, man, like a lot of these teachings is not in the Bible. Where do we get this from? You know what I'm saying? Like, so some of the creeds that we see of the first century church and what a believer should be, some of the essentials we don't we didn't we don't have that today. Like people get mad at me because like I like I said, I deal with the Trinity. I believe the Trinity is the best way according to the scriptures to explain what we see in the Godhead. And but for the most part, the when you start looking at the teachings of the first century, as and what Christ was teaching, how do you make this essential to where you telling people to where, and a lot of the people started, even Trinitarians is coming out and saying, I don't know where they got that from, because you can't go up to tell somebody. It took some people like 13 years, probably 5, 6 years to even understand the Trinity, and some people don't understand it today, and that's why when they have debates about it, they be losing in a lot of those debates, and horribly, and so you saying this is essential. Where did you get that from? You know what I'm saying? And so God is not looking for you. We only know the nature of part of the God's nature in part now, but we need to understand that the Father sent the Son, and whatever the Son is saying, that he's saying it from the Father, and we better follow what he's saying. You know what I'm saying? And understand that, and that he is the Son of God, and that you can't go nowhere else but through the Son. Like there's nowhere else to go but through the Son. And so that's very important. The gospel is the power of God into salvation. And so people try to make and say, well, this, and I know people will argue that. I'm saying, but for the most part, you ain't gonna you shouldn't go up to somebody and say, did you know that the Godhead consists of uh three distinct persons within the Godhead? You go up and you tell people stuff like that, and you need this to be saved. You know what I'm saying? You need to know this to be saved. The apostles, and nor did the first church never teach that. They taught about the Trinity, but they didn't teach that it was essential to the first to the faith. Even some Calvinists say that it's secondary. And so where do we get these teachings from? And so we've made the teachings by our traditions uh so with the word of God of none effect. People don't want to hear that, and try to sit back for 5 to 6 years and try to learn this and still don't understand it. And then when they don't understand it, they feel like that is essential, and they feel like they must be saved. And so when you're going around telling people because they believe in oneness, or they believe in this, that they not say, I don't believe that. I believe that if somebody going around say that Jesus may be the Father, well, okay, they may say Jesus is the Father, but you better follow what Jesus is saying to do, and you believe on the gospel. Uh, I believe some Catholics are believers. You know what I'm saying? We all got some weird teachings. I believe that when even though I don't agree with a lot of Israelite doctrine, you know, uh, I believe some of those guys are believers that they say that hold to the tenets of the New Testament. You know what I'm saying? And what the gospel is. Uh, but all that other stuff, man, like I don't really get off into a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I don't either, for the most part. But the moment someone starts being dogmatic about it and just goes out to provoke people, really just be a troll. That's where I step in, like, okay, what is up with you? Like, whenever somebody asks me about the Trinity and where it originates from, my main de facto default is to go with the two powers theology of Second Temple Judaism and the divine fluidity theology of ancient Israelite religion.
That's what I will go with too.
Yeah, because that is going to be your primary, like, that's where you're going to want to start, because the attacks at Trinity is, a lot of them are, some that I've come across, a lot of them are based off ignorance. It's not just on the non-believers' part, it's also on the believers' end as well, because they're not familiar with this. You basically want to show how this is rooted in biblical theology, and in order to fully supplant that, to have a firm foundation for that belief, and
right,
to basically make a solid argument for it. That's where you're going to want to go with historical, basically historical theological beliefs, because the moment you show two powers theology in Second Temple Judaism, that there were Jews who believed in a divine figures, divine angels, who were exalted or called Son of God or are called God themselves. It gives you that first step to showing, our beliefs about Jesus being God or divine. This is not a violation of monotheism. This was believed by Jews Second Temple period and was not that. And you also have similar models in ancient Near East as well, with kings being quasi-divine-ish because they're adopted as they're adopted as gods, the sons of the gods. But primarily, it's the fluidity theology of ancient Israel with God's divine fragmentation, or his fluidity theology, where he is in heaven and at the same time he's on earth, and takes on bodies in place, times, and localities. And that's where it also goes back to that cult image, Adam in Genesis 1:26, just as an example.
Right. And that's what I agree with too, because I definitely like the two powers. And I think that's the best way to really, if you're gonna be looking at that and explaining the Trinity to somebody, is through the lens of that, and to interpret the scriptures. But what happens is people find Michael Heiser to be heretical. You know what I'm saying? And so you like, well, why is that? And when you start looking at the people that's doing it, then you start realizing it's the Calvinists. It's them that's doing it. It is like, it's like if you just look at what he's saying, it can help your arguments, because you're not really arguing that good in the first place, and you losing to people like One West Camps. How do you lose to One West Camp? You know what I'm saying? And you're you're a believer when it comes to the text more than what they is. But like, we win some, we lose some, but at the same time, if somebody tell you, well, you need to check out that Michael Heiser, the first thing they're gonna say is, oh man, I don't want to check out Michael Heiser. He's heretical and this and that, you know what I'm saying? And they never really have the firepower that they need to go in there and explain to people, when it comes to what the scriptures are saying in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Me personally, I wouldn't even go to the New Testament unless I had to, if I was going to explain it, because they got a problem with the New Testament for reals, if you think about it. You know what I'm saying? But if you hit them with the Old Testament, then what they gonna say? You know what I'm saying, because the Old Testament better than them when it comes to what the text is saying. But yeah, they definitely have a problem with the New Testament. That's why they trying to reject Paul. They trying to reject the oh man, he got hurt. Oh, they trying to reject the they trying to oh they trying to reject Paul and reject other texts as well too.
And they were torn to special pleading by that point. Yeah, Paul undermines the theology, and so apostles, so they reject them, and they go to Jesus only. But even Jesus does not support the theology, so they're going to retort to reject the New Testament as a whole. So they're forced to retort the Old Testament, but even that falls apart because even that does not agree with the theology on that end. Like, what is it? Like most people, like most Calvinists I've heard that have come out against Heiser are primarily James White. And
yeah.
how dare you interpret the Old Testament through unbelieving scripture? What?
Right. You know who I like too? That you probably he comes on her too, and he study a lot of he study a lot of Kemet, and he'll study some Sumer. He'll study Sumer too, and some of the stuff that we see in Europe. His name is it's what's the guy's name? One way or one I think it's one way or something, apologetics or something. And sometimes he'd come on. He hasn't came on in a long time. He has his own page. You know, I'm heretical to them because I deal with I'm a neo Molinist, and so you know, they got they, you know, I'm heretical to them, so they got they, So, but it is what it is. A lot of people don't know that a lot of that stuff we talking about the nature of God. Most people ain't going around talking about, well, God is a girl and all this whole stupid stuff, and I'm saying all this and that's silly. I'm saying all this other stuff, and Christ ain't came in the flesh, and this and that. But when you learning the nature of God, and you looking at certain things, and that stuff is complex. It's not something to where you just learn at once. It's something that you start looking at the text and you start saying, well, this text ain't saying this and saying that. Where did we get that from? Uh, but the main message, which is the saving tool of God, is the gospel, the death, burial, and resurrection. And so then we'll try to get into the crevices of that and say, well, we got to bring this out in, but nah, none of that don't follow. Mainly, the main thing we see is heretical things is we start saying people is not following after traditions of the apostles and what Christ has delivered unto them, is teaching otherwise, which are major things, you know what I'm saying, when it comes towards being led by the Spirit and not to fulfill the deeds of the flesh, and not believing on the gospel, which is the death, burial, resurrection, and Christ not coming in the flesh and saying all this so crazy stuff, and saying you got faith, but you ain't being obedient to the faith. What kind of stuff is that? You got faith, but then you when it's time for you to operate in that faith of uh, to establish your brother, you ain't doing none of that. So these are the things. But yeah, man, that's a cool guy to talk with. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if you got any last words, but I'm finna lay down, man, and go on to sleep, call my wife, and I'll tell her.
Uh, uh, mainly, mainly to the audience. Don't just don't just listen to what we're saying. Well, do, but don't just believe it offhand. Uh, do your own research. Look up sources we cited and spoke about, and basically jot down notes and arrive at your own conclusions. Don't take what we say just because we say it. Because if you really, because when you're discovering the truth, you want to make sure that you're justified to believe that, and just believing it just because somebody says so is that's not going to fly when you're trying to witness to other people. You want to give a justification for why you believe it. And this is me speaking because I've studied somewhat philosophy and epistemology, but that's what I have to say on that. And mainly stick with Christ and the gospel and keep seeking. Don't ever stop.
Right, and that's what I would say too, because a lot of stuff that we saying is just like secondary stuff. Like we want to take it a little bit deeper into some studies for apologetic reasons, but for the most part, grasping the gospel is the most important thing, if anything, um, because it's we don't want nobody thinking, oh, we're extra deep. The gospel is so base to where it's easy to understand. Like these other little things is what we do for apologetics to witness to people that probably have gone off into other type of studies and then to defend certain biblical narratives, but mainly, ultimately the gospel is definitely the saving mechanism that God uses it does not involve these type of wisdom of the world, or a person knowing the chronology, or learning about Sumer or Egypt. Yeah, those things, we use to help to witness, but the simplicity of the Bible is the gospel, which is very important. And so I will agree with that, brother, to where I'm not telling you to go out here and do this and that, do this and that. You might don't want to take it that level, because I know that the brother Stephen, he studies, Ugarit, Hebrew, like different stuff like that, or history. You know what I'm saying? Everybody might not they might not do that. You know what I'm saying? Whereas we take it to that level to do those things, but for the most part, ultimately, we know that the saving mechanism is the gospel of the Christ. But with that being said, appreciate you coming by, Stephen. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, brother. You always raise my mind to study other things and look out for the different perspectives, and and that's a good thing. And I'm always challenged, and also learning whenever I speak with you. So, appreciate you coming by. Grace and peace to the audience out there for sticking around. I think this was a great conversation. Make sure you guys can share it if you can. You got different perspectives, but at the same time, still teaching mechanisms that we see it was brought about. With that being said, peace to you guys out there, and I don't know when the next one will be back, but we was looking to get the brother here. He never came on. He probably just watched, or he did his show over there, but he had so much to say where he was at. He was going in on me, wasn't he, man? When he go
uh, the ad homs and
right,
yeah, ad homs is really gonna help support your claim. Not.
right. He did not want to come over here. That brother stayed where he was. I gave the link. I put the YouTube out. He didn't come through. The brother just was a failure today. But with that being said, he could win in Christ, and we all can. With that being said, peace and blessings to y'all. Tune in. Make sure y'all click and subscribe the next time. All right, peace.
All right. God bless, man.
God bless,
Peace.
brother. Peace.